If you are enjoying this video, smash that like button, subscribe, and hit the bell. Share it with your friends, and let me know in the comments where you are watching from. Every like and subscribe helps the channel grow. My name is Jack Hawthorne, and this happened to me back in 1963. I was 45 then, working as a forest ranger at Black Pine Forest in Montana. Before that, I'd served in the Korean War, something that still gave me nightmares. But those nightmares? They were nothing compared to what I was about to face that winter. It was the coldest winter anyone could remember. The thermometer outside my cabin would drop to -40°4 F at night, and the wind howled like a wounded animal. I'd been a ranger here for 5 years, but something felt different about this winter. Maybe I should have paid more attention to what the local Native American elders had been warning us about. The winter walker comes when the cold bites deepest, they'd say. It hungers most when the snow falls heaviest. I used to think these were just old stories to keep kids from wandering into the forest. Boy, was I wrong. It all started when 3 hikers went missing in just 1 week. That's not normal, even in bad weather. I'd seen plenty of lost hikers in my time, but something about these disappearances made my skin crawl. Then I found those tracks in the snow. I'll never forget those footprints. They were huge, about 16 inches long, and whatever made them walked on 2 legs. But what really got to me were the claw marks. Deep, sharp gouges in the snow, like nothing I'd ever seen from a bear or mountain lion. Little did I know, that was just the beginning of my nightmare in Black Pine Forest. A nightmare that would change me forever, and leave me with a curse that my family will carry for generations to come. Want to hear the rest? Well, grab a seat by the fire, and pray that scratching sound outside is just the wind in the trees. The morning I found the first body is something I'll never forget. It was early, maybe 6 a.m., and the sun hadn't even risen yet. I was following those strange tracks I'd found earlier, my flashlight beam cutting through the darkness. The air was so cold it hurt to breathe. That's when my light caught something in the snow. At first, I thought it was a fallen tree trunk, but as I got closer, my heart nearly stopped. It was one of the missing hikers, frozen solid. But something was terribly wrong. It looked like something had opened them up and taken what was inside. I'd seen awful things in the war, but this was different. I radioed for backup, but the storm was getting worse. That's when I noticed the marks on the trees. Way up high, about 15 feet off the ground, there were these deep claw marks in the bark. No bear could reach that high. No normal animal could do that. As I waited for help, I heard something that made my blood run cold. A sound that shouldn't have been possible, something walking in the forest. But the footsteps were heavy, like a house moving on legs. And then I saw it, through the swirling snow. It was tall, taller than any man I'd ever seen. Must have been at least 12 feet high. Its body was skinny, like something that had been starving for years. But what really got me were its eyes. They glowed blue, like ice in moonlight. And its head, God help me, it looked like a deer's skull, but wrong somehow. Bigger, and with too many points on its antlers. I stood there, frozen, watching it move through my forest. The snow seemed to swirl around it, like it was creating its own personal blizzard. That's when I first understood what the elders had been warning us about. This was the winter walker. This was what they called a Wendigo. I knew right then that my job wasn't just about finding missing hikers anymore. It was about stopping whatever this thing was before it could take anyone else. But I had no idea how someone like me could fight something like that, or what it would cost me to try. The next few days were a blur of fear and searching. 2 more hikers went missing, and each time I found their tracks, they ended the same way, leading to that thing's massive footprints. I wasn't sleeping well anymore. Every time I closed my eyes, I'd see those glowing blue ones staring back at me. One night, while I was in my cabin going through missing persons reports, I heard something that made my heart stop. It was Tommy's voice, my old buddy from the Korean War who died in my arms. "Jack, help me! I am hurt out here!" I knew it couldn't be real. Tommy had been dead for 10 years. That's when I remembered what the elders had said. The Wendigo could copy any human voice to trick its prey. It was trying to lure me out. But then I heard another voice, this time a real one. On my radio, 3 young hikers were calling for help. They'd gotten lost in the sudden storm and were looking for shelter. They mentioned they'd found an old mine entrance and were heading inside. My blood ran cold. I knew that it was the perfect trap. The Wendigo must have been steering them there all along. I grabbed my gear, some flares, and my rifle, though I doubted bullets would help much, and headed out into the storm. The wind was so strong it nearly knocked me over. The snow was blinding, and the cold bit through my clothes like needles. But I could hear the creature out there moving in the darkness. Sometimes it would use Tommy's voice, sometimes the voices of the missing hikers. It was playing with me like a cat with a mouse. I finally made it to the mine entrance. Inside, I found the 3 hikers, 2 men and a woman, all in their 20s, huddled together for warmth. They were scared but alive. But we weren't alone in that mine. I could hear something moving in the deeper tunnels, and the temperature kept dropping lower and lower. I knew then we were in for the fight of our lives. The Wendigo had us right where it wanted us, and the night was just beginning. The mine was pitch black except for our flashlights. I could hear water dripping somewhere deep inside, and our breaths came out in white puffs. I told the hikers to stay close. Sarah, Mike, and Tom were their names. They were shivering, not just from the cold, but from fear. That's when we heard it. The sound of claws scraping against rock, getting closer. I remembered what one of the elders had told me about fighting these creatures. Only the ancient flames can drive away the winter's hunger, they'd said. I had some flares and my old Zippo lighter. It wasn't much, but it was all we had. The thing came at us fast. In the flashlight beam, I saw those blue eyes and that horrible deer skull face. It moved like a spider, too quick for something so big. The hikers screamed. I pushed them behind me and did the only thing I could think of. I rushed at it. Looking back, it was probably crazy, but I had to give those kids a chance. The Wendigo grabbed me with its bony hands. They were like ice and strong as steel. I felt my left arm crack in its grip. The pain was horrible, but I managed to pull out my flare with my other hand. I remember shouting at the hikers, "Run! Get out now!" They hesitated, but then ran for the entrance. The Wendigo tried to follow them, but I did something I knew I'd regret. I jammed the lit flare right into its chest. The creature screamed. It sounded like ice cracking and wind howling all at once. It dropped me, and I fell hard on the mine floor. My arm was useless, probably frozen solid by its touch. But I wasn't done. I pulled out every flare I had and my lighter. If fire could hurt it, I was going to give it all the fire I had. The next few minutes were like a nightmare. Me throwing lit flares, the Wendigo shrieking and trying to dodge them, the mine filled with red light and shadows. Then something strange happened. Where the flares hit, the creature's body began to smoke and crack, like ice in hot water. But just before it disappeared into the darkness, it looked at me with those terrible blue eyes and spoke. Its voice was like winter itself. "Your blood is mine now, Hawthorne. Your children's children will hear my call." I barely made it out of that mine. The hikers had called for help on my radio, and a rescue team found us all. But something had changed forever that night. They took me to the hospital after that night. The doctors couldn't explain why my left arm was frozen solid. They had to remove it. But that wasn't the strangest change. When I looked in the mirror a week later, my hair had turned completely white, like fresh snow. The doctors said it was from shock, but I knew better. The 3 hikers I saved that night still write to me sometimes. They're the lucky ones. 7 people died that winter in Black Pine Forest. The official reports say they were lost in the storms, but we know the truth. But the worst part? The Wendigo's curse was real. Sometimes, when I look at people, I get this feeling, like a cold wind blowing through my mind, and I just know when someone's time is coming. It's a terrible gift I never wanted. My son was born a year later. On his 10th birthday, his hair started turning white, just like mine. Now he gets those same feelings too. The curse passed down, just like the creatures said it would. I still work as a ranger here in Black Pine Forest. Someone needs to keep watch. The winters aren't as cold as they used to be, but sometimes, when the temperature drops really low and the snow falls heavy, I hear something moving in the trees. And every now and then, I find those huge footprints in the snow. You might be wondering why I am telling you this story. Well, last night, my hair turned even whiter, if that's possible. And this morning, I found fresh tracks outside my cabin, 16 inches long, with deep claw marks. The winter walker is coming back. So if you are ever in Black Pine Forest during winter, and you hear someone you love calling for help from the trees, don't follow that voice. And if you see eyes glowing blue in the darkness, run. Run as fast as you can. Because the Wendigo is still out there, still hungry, and it never forgets a curse. My name is Marcus Reed, and this happened to me back in 1977, when I was working as a park ranger in the Ozark Mountains of Arkansas. I was 38 then, and after spending 15 years doing cave rescues, I thought I'd seen everything the darkness could throw at me. But I was wrong, so terribly wrong. I still remember that morning when everything started. The ground had been shaking for days. Nothing major, just small tremors that made the coffee ripple in our mugs at the ranger station. But then came that big earthquake. It wasn't devastating like the ones you see on television, but it was strong enough to split open a section of the mountainside, revealing something that should have stayed hidden forever. I was the first one they called to check out the new cave opening. Made sense, I was the cave rescue specialist after all. The moment I stood there, staring into that black mouth in the rock, something felt off. The air coming out was different. Not the usual cool, damp cave breath, but something stale and ancient, like opening a tomb that had been sealed for thousands of years. What made it even stranger were the markings we found around the entrance. Old petroglyphs, carved deep into the rock. I'd seen Native American rock art before, but these were different. They showed strange, stretched-out figures and had warnings about those who dwell below. Back then, I just thought it was interesting history. Now I know those warnings were real. Then the calls started coming in about 5 missing spelunkers, cave explorers who'd gone in to map the new system. They were experienced folks, not some tourists who'd wandered off the path. When they didn't come back after 2 days, I knew something was seriously wrong. Especially when all our equipment started acting weird. Compasses spinning in circles, radios picking up strange clicking sounds, flashlights flickering for no reason. That's how it all began. If I'd known what was waiting for us down there in the dark, I would have sealed that cave right then and there. But I didn't know. None of us did. And now I can't even hear the wind in the trees anymore. Not since what those things did to me down there in the deep. Let me tell you the whole story. But I warn you, after hearing this, you might never look at a cave the same way again. And that dark space under your bed? You might want to check it twice tonight. The next morning, I put together a rescue team. There were 4 of us. Me, Tom, our local medic, Sarah, a geologist, and Mike, another experienced cave rescuer. We packed enough supplies for 3 days, though something in my gut told me we might need more. The cave entrance was like a giant black smile in the mountain. As we stood there checking our gear one last time, our helmet lights barely made a dent in the darkness ahead. The weird thing was how quiet it was. No birds, no insects, nothing, just silence. Even our radios were acting strange, making these odd clicking sounds that nobody could explain. "I don't like this, Marcus," Tom said, fiddling with his medical kit. "Something feels wrong." I knew what he meant. In all my years of cave rescue, I'd never felt this uneasy. But there were 5 people down there who needed our help, so we had no choice. We started our descent around 9 a.m. The first hour was normal enough, just your usual tight spaces and careful climbing. But then we found something that made us all stop. There, on a cave wall, were more of those ancient drawings, but these were different. They showed people running from tall, skinny figures. And the weird part? The paint was still fresh, like someone or something had just made them. "That's impossible," Sarah whispered, touching the marks. "These couldn't have been here more than a few days." Then we found the first sign of the missing spelunkers. A broken camera, its lens cracked, lying next to some strange marks on the ground. They looked like handprints, but wrong somehow, too long, with fingers that seemed to stretch like spider legs. Mike picked up the camera. "Look at this," he said, showing us the last photo taken. It was blurry, but you could make out something moving in the background, something pale and tall that shouldn't have been there. That's when we heard it, a soft clicking sound echoing through the tunnels. At first, we thought it was just water dripping or rock settling, but then it changed, becoming more rhythmic, like some kind of language, and it was getting closer. Our lights started flickering, and the air got colder. We huddled together, backs against the wall, watching the darkness ahead. The clicking got louder, and then everything went quiet. Too quiet. "Nobody move," I whispered, but I could feel it. We weren't alone anymore. Something was watching us from the shadows, something that knew these caves better than we ever could. And that was just the beginning of our nightmare. What happened next still gives me nightmares. We were standing there, frozen, when our lights caught something moving on the cave wall. At first, I thought it was just shadows playing tricks on us. But then I saw it clearly, a pale, human-like figure crawling across the rock like a spider. It had no eyes, just smooth, white skin where eyes should be. "Run!" I shouted. But before we could move, more of them appeared. They were everywhere, on the walls, the ceiling, coming out of small tunnels we hadn't even noticed. They moved so fast, making those clicking sounds that seemed to bounce off every wall. Mike panicked and tried to run back the way we came. That was a mistake. One of the creatures dropped down right in front of him. We heard him scream, and then silence. Sarah grabbed my arm so hard it hurt. "This way!" I pulled Sarah and Tom into a narrow tunnel. The creatures followed, but they were too big to fit through all at once. Their long fingers kept reaching for us as we squeezed through the tight space. We ran until our lungs burned. The tunnel opened into a larger cave, and that's when we saw it, the missing spelunkers' camp. Their equipment was scattered everywhere, and their sleeping bags were torn to shreds. But no bodies, no blood. They were just gone. "Marcus," Tom whispered, pointing his light at the cave ceiling. I looked up and felt my heart stop. Hundreds of bones were stuck to the roof of the cave, some old and yellow, others still .fresh. This wasn't just a cave, it was their nest. But the worst part? Among the bones, I saw something that changed everything. Old mining helmets, some looking decades old, and rusty dog tags from soldiers who'd gone missing in these mountains years ago. That's when it hit me, these creatures. They used to be human. Somehow, over many years in the darkness, they'd changed into something else. Sarah was trying to get her camera out with shaking hands. "People need to know about this," she said. That's when we heard it, a different kind of clicking, louder than before. It wasn't coming from around us. It was coming from inside our heads. Tom grabbed his ears and fell to his knees. "Make it stop!" he screamed. The sound was getting louder, like thousands of insects clicking all at once, drilling into our brains. I grabbed Sarah and Tom. "We need to move, now." But as we turned to run, we saw them. 7 pairs of eyeless faces staring at us from every exit. They had us surrounded, and they were done playing hide and seek. The real hunt was about to begin. What happened in the next few minutes was pure chaos. The creatures attacked all at once, moving faster than anything I'd ever seen. Tom threw his flashlight at one of them, and for a second, we saw them flinch away from the bright light. That was our chance. "The lights!" I yelled. "They hate the lights!" We pointed all our lights at them, moving them back just enough to create a path. But our victory didn't last long. One by one, our flashlights started dying, like something was draining their power. Sarah was the first to notice the small tunnel near the ground. "There," she pointed. It was tight, but it was our only chance. We crawled through as fast as we could, hearing those things right behind us, their clicks getting angrier. Tom was last in line. I heard him scream, "They've got my leg!" Sarah and I turned back to help, but it was too late. They pulled him into the darkness so fast, all we heard was his fading scream. "We can't help him now," I told Sarah, fighting back tears. "We have to keep moving." We crawled until we found a small cave with an underground stream. Our last flashlight was barely working now, giving off just enough light to see each other's faces. Sarah was crying silently. "Marcus," she whispered, "look at the water." The stream was flowing towards what looked like a bigger tunnel, and there was something else, a faint light coming from that direction, daylight. But just as hope started to rise, we heard them coming, dozens of them. Their clicks were different now, excited, hungry. They knew they had us trapped. I looked at our dying flashlight, then at the cave walls around us. Years of cave rescue experience kicked in, and I knew what we had to do. It was risky, but it was our only chance. "Sarah, give me your backpack," I said quickly, "and all the flares we have left. What are you thinking? These cave walls are unstable. One big blast could bring the whole thing down." I started placing the flares around the cave entrance where the clicks were coming from. "When I say run, you run towards that light. Don't stop, don't look back." "But what about you? I'll be right behind you." The clicks were getting closer. I could see their pale bodies moving in the darkness, their long fingers reaching for us. I lit the first flare. "Run!" I shouted. "Run now!" Sarah took off towards the light. I lit the rest of the flares and threw them at the cave walls. The creatures screamed, a sound I'll never forget, as the explosion started. The whole cave began to shake. I ran as fast as I could, rocks falling all around me. The last thing I heard before everything went dark was that terrible clicking sound, now turned into screams of fury, being buried under tons of rock. But we weren't safe yet, not by a long shot. I ran through the falling rocks, my lungs burning, following Sarah's footsteps. The tunnel seemed endless, but that faint light kept getting brighter. Behind us, the cave was collapsing, sealing away those creatures. Or at least, that's what I hoped. Just when I thought we might make it, I heard it, one final deafening screech. It was like 1,000 nails on a chalkboard, but 100 times worse. The sound hit me like a physical wave, and I felt something pop in my ears. Everything went quiet, like someone had turned off the volume of the world. I saw Sarah's mouth moving, shouting something, but I couldn't hear her. I couldn't hear anything. The creature's last attack had taken my hearing, but at least we were almost out. We burst into daylight just as the last of the tunnel collapsed behind us. We'd come out somewhere else on the mountain, about a mile from where we'd entered. Sarah and I just lay there in the grass, breathing in the fresh air, letting the sun warm our faces. When the rescue team found us hours later, they didn't believe our story. How could they? But the evidence was there. The collapsed cave, our injuries, and most convincingly, my permanent deafness. The government people showed up the next day. They sealed off the entire area, put up fences, and posted guards. They told everyone it was because of unstable ground. Sarah and I were the only survivors out of our team. The bodies of Tom, Mike, and the 5 missing spelunkers were never found. Sometimes I wonder if they're still down there, in those dark tunnels, becoming something else. It's been many years since that day, but I still have nightmares. In them, I am back in that cave, and I can hear those clicks again, the only sounds I can still hear in my dreams. The doctors say my hearing loss is permanent, but maybe that's for the best. I don't think I could stand hearing another cave echo without thinking of them. I left my job as a ranger after that. Never went near another cave again. Sarah became a researcher, trying to understand what we saw down there. She thinks there might be more of these cave systems, more of those creatures out there. I pray she's wrong. Sometimes late at night, I feel vibrations in the ground, like something moving deep below. And when I look at the mountains in the distance, I can't help but wonder, are they still down there, behind all that rock? And worse, are they finding new ways out? The government keeps that cave sealed tight, but I know the truth. No seal is perfect, and those things, they're patient. They've had generations to learn how to wait in the dark. So if you are ever hiking in the Ozarks and you come across a cave that's been blocked off, just turn around and walk away. And if you hear clicking sounds in the darkness, run. Run as fast as you can, while you still can. Because some things should stay buried deep underground, and some mysteries are better left unsolved. My name is Diana Wolf, and this happened to me in 1985, a year I'll never forget. I was working as a ranger in the Olympic Peninsula of Washington State, one of the most beautiful places you could imagine, with its thick forests and misty mountains. I was 41 then, and I'd spent most of my life tracking animals and keeping the wilderness safe. That was my job, and I was good at it, really good at it. I lived alone in a small cabin near the ranger station, just the way I liked it. My days were usually filled with checking trails, helping lost hikers, and making sure the local wildlife stayed wild. I knew every tree, every path, and every animal track in my area. At least, I thought I did, until that blood moon came. It all started when those logging companies began cutting down trees in the north section. I remember that day clearly. The air felt different, heavier somehow. They'd stumbled upon something they shouldn't have, an ancient native burial ground. I tried to warn them to stop, but you know how big companies are. They care more about money than respect for the dead. That's when strange things began happening. First, it was just little things. Weird animal tracks I'd never seen before. Unusual howling at night that made my skin crawl. And dead animals that looked wrong, somehow. Like something had changed them from the inside out. But I didn't know then that these were just warnings. I didn't know that with each tree they cut down, with each sacred stone they moved, they were waking up something that should have stayed sleeping. Something that had been waiting for the right moment, the coming blood moon eclipse. Looking back now, I should have seen the signs. But how could anyone have guessed what was really happening? How could anyone have prepared for what came next? This is my story, and I swear every word of it is true. Even though sometimes, late at night, I wish it wasn't. It was early October when I saw the first one. I was doing my evening patrol, checking the areas where hikers usually camp. The sun was setting, painting the sky in shades of orange and red. That's when I heard it. A sound that wasn't quite a wolf's howl, but wasn't human either. I froze in my tracks. 20 years of tracking experience told me something was very wrong. The forest had gone completely silent. No birds, no squirrels, nothing. Just that awful sound echoing through the trees. Then I saw it. Standing between two massive pine trees was something that made my blood run cold. It looked like a wolf, but it was huge, at least 8 feet tall when it stood on its hind legs. Its eyes glowed with an unnatural yellow light, and its fur seemed to move like smoke in the wind. But the worst part? It was watching me. Not like an animal watches. This thing was thinking. I slowly reached for my radio, keeping my eyes locked on the creature. That's when I noticed something else. The ground where it stood was burning. Not with fire, but with something that looked like radiation burns, leaving black marks on the fallen leaves. It disappeared into the shadows before I could do anything else, but I knew what I'd seen. The problem was, who would believe me? I'd sound crazy if I reported seeing an 8-foot-tall wolf that could stand like a man. Over the next few days, things got worse. Hikers started reporting missing pets. Then we found dead animals, deer, elk, even bears, all twisted and changed in ways I can't even describe. Their bones looked wrong, like something had tried to reshape them from the inside. But the scariest part was yet to come. I started finding footprints that would change from wolf paws to human feet in the same track, as if something was transforming as it walked. And every time I found these tracks, they were getting closer and closer to populated areas. One evening, I got a call about a missing hiker. When I found him the next day, he was different. His eyes were yellow, just like that creature's, and he couldn't remember anything about the past 24 hours. But the worst part? He had those same radiation-like burns all over his hands and face. I knew I had to do something. The blood moon eclipse was coming in just a few days, and somehow, deep in my gut, I knew that whatever these things were, they were getting ready for it. They were getting stronger, and they were gathering. Little did I know, I was about to face something that would change my life forever, something that no ranger training could have prepared me for. I spent the next few days gathering information. I couldn't sleep every night. Those howls got closer to my cabin. Sometimes, I'd wake up to find those burning marks right outside my door. Whatever these things were, they were watching me. I started talking to the local native elders. At first, they were quiet, like they were afraid to speak about it. But when I showed them pictures of the tracks and the burns, one old man, Thomas, finally told me the truth. "Those are the dogmen," he said, his voice shaking. "Our ancestors sealed them away in that burial ground centuries ago. The logging, it broke the seal. And now, with the blood moon coming." He stopped talking and just shook his head. Thomas told me these creatures weren't just big wolves. They were something ancient and smart. They could think like humans, but hunt like wolves. Worse, they could control regular wolves, making them do whatever they wanted. And during a blood moon, they would be at their strongest. That's when things got really bad. People started acting strange in the nearby towns. Their eyes would turn yellow, just like that missing hiker's. They'd disappear for hours and come back with no memory. I realized the dogmen weren't just killing. They were possessing people. I tried calling for help, but who would believe this? The local police thought I was making up stories. My boss at the ranger station told me to take some time off, said I was working too hard. But I knew what I had to do. Thomas gave me his grandfather's journal, full of information about these creatures. One thing stood out. Silver bullets could hurt them. I spent every penny I had buying silver and melting it down to make ammunition. I didn't know if it would work, but I had to try. The night before the eclipse, I counted 12 different howls. They were gathering, preparing for something big. I loaded my rifle with the silver bullets and headed to the fire tower, the highest point in my area. From there, I could see everything for miles. What I didn't know was that I was walking right into their trap. They weren't just gathering, they were hunting me. As I climbed the tower steps, the sun was starting to set. The moon was rising, already turning a deep blood red. And then I heard it, the sound of heavy breathing and claws on metal, coming from all around the tower. I barely made it to the top of the fire tower when they attacked. 12 of them, massive dogmen, their eyes glowing like burning coals in the darkness. The blood moon hung above us, huge and red, making everything look like it was covered in blood. The first one jumped at the tower, shaking the whole structure. I grabbed my rifle and fired. The silver bullet hit it right in the chest, and for the first time, I heard one of them scream in pain. It fell back, smoke rising from where the bullet hit. Now I knew Thomas was right, silver could hurt them. But there were too many. They started climbing the tower, their claws screeching against the metal. I kept shooting, trying to make every bullet count. 2 more fell, but they kept coming. The tower swayed dangerously with each hit. Then I heard a voice, a human voice, coming from the largest dogman, the alpha. It stood taller than the others, with fur as black as midnight. "Diana Wolf," it growled, speaking my name in a way that made my blood freeze. "You are fighting against something you don't understand. This land was ours long before it was yours." I was shocked. These things could talk, but I didn't have time to think about it. The eclipse was starting, and with each passing minute, they seemed to get stronger. Their eyes glowed brighter, their movements got faster. That's when I remembered something else from Thomas's journal. There was an ancient tribal weapon, a spear blessed by his ancestors. It was kept in a cave not far from the tower. But how could I reach it with these monsters surrounding me? The Alpha must have read my mind. "You are thinking about the spear," it snarled. "Too late. We destroyed it decades ago. Nothing can stop us now." The tower creaked and groaned as more dogmen climbed up. I was running out of silver bullets. The eclipse was almost complete. I could feel the heat from their radiation like burns even from above. The metal floor of the tower was starting to melt where they touched it. I had one chance left. I noticed the emergency fuel container in the corner, the one we used for the tower's warning light. If I couldn't fight them all, maybe I could at least take most of them with me. I grabbed the fuel container with shaking hands. The Alpha saw what I was doing and howled, a sound that was part warning, part rage. The other dogmen started climbing faster. "You'll die too, Diana," the Alpha growled. "Maybe," I answered, "but I am taking you with me." Just as I was about to throw the container, something incredible happened. A bright light cut through the darkness, but it wasn't from the blood moon. Thomas and 3 other elders had come. They were holding pieces of the spear I thought was destroyed. The Alpha had lied. "Diana," Thomas shouted, "catch!" He threw the pieces up to me. The dogmen tried to stop them, but something, maybe the old magic in those spear pieces, made them pull back. My hands moved on their own, putting the spear together as if I'd done it 1,000 times before. The complete spear glowed with a blue light that hurt my eyes. The dogmen howled in pain just looking at it. The Alpha roared, "Kill her, now!" Everything happened at once. The dogmen jumped at me from all sides. I swung the spear in a wide arc, and that blue light exploded outward. It was like watching a wave of moonlight sweep through the air. Every dogman it touched just disappeared, like they were made of smoke that got blown away by the wind. But the Alpha was smart. It jumped away just in time, taking 3 of its pack with it. I saw them running into the forest, their shapes melting into the darkness. The blood moon started to fade, and with it, their howls grew distant. I collapsed on the tower floor, my whole body shaking. Thomas and the elders helped me down. I was alive, but something felt different. Where one of the dogmen had grabbed my arm, there was a mark, like a paw print burned into my skin. Thomas looked at it and shook his head. "The curse," he said quietly. "It's not over. They'll be back at the next blood moon, and now they'll be hunting you specifically." I looked at the forest where the Alpha had disappeared. 15 people had died during those terrible days. I was the only one who survived the tower attack. But as I touched the mark on my arm, I knew Thomas was right. This wasn't over. Even now, years later, I still work as a ranger. But I watch the moon every night, counting the days. I keep the spear close, and my silver bullets closer. Because I know they're out there, waiting. And when the next blood moon comes, well, this time, I'll be ready for them. My name is Michael O'Brien, and this happened to me back in 1991 when I was working as a ranger in the Appalachian Mountains of Virginia. I was 35 then, and life was simpler, or at least I thought it was. Before becoming a ranger, I had been a priest, but that's a story for another time. What I am about to tell you changed my life forever, and even now, 30 years later, I still wake up in cold sweats thinking about it. It all started in early October. The leaves were turning golden and red, making the mountains look like they were on fire during sunset. I was doing my usual rounds in my beat-up green Jeep, checking on the camping sites and making sure no hikers were lost. That's when I got the first call about a missing kid. Little Tommy Wilson, just 8 years old, had wandered away from his backyard, which bordered the forest. His mom had only turned away for 5 minutes to answer the phone, but when she came back, he was gone. Just vanished, like smoke in the wind. I didn't know then that Tommy would be just the first of many. The search party found nothing that first night, but I noticed something strange, these weird stick figures hanging from the trees. They looked like the kind kids make in art class, but there was something off about them. They were too perfect, too deliberate. And I swear, even though there wasn't any wind that evening, they kept turning to face me as I walked past. That same night, I noticed something else that made my skin crawl. A thick mist started rolling in through the trees. Now, I'd seen plenty of fog in these mountains, but this was different. It moved wrong, like it had a mind of its own. It would curl against the wind, reaching out with finger-like tendrils as if it was searching for something. Or someone. I tried to radio back to base about the weird mist, but my radio just crackled with static. My flashlight started flickering too, and the battery in my phone drained completely even though I'd charged it that morning. Looking back, I should have known right then that we were dealing with something that wasn't natural, something that didn't belong in our world. But I was about to find out exactly what that something was, and it would make me question everything I thought I knew about reality. The hollow men were coming, and they were hungry. The next morning, another child went missing. Then, another. Within a week, 4 kids had disappeared without a trace. The whole town was in panic, and parents wouldn't let their children play outside anymore. I spent every waking hour in those woods, searching for clues, but something felt very wrong about this case. One evening, as the sun was setting, I saw something that still haunts me. I was walking down an old hiking trail when I noticed the trees ahead looked different. At first, I thought it was just shadows playing tricks on my eyes, but then I saw them move. They were tall, maybe 8 or 9 feet high. Their bodies were like dark smoke shaped like people, but without faces, just empty blackness where eyes should be. They moved between the trees like they were dancing, but there was nothing beautiful about it. These were the hollow men, though I didn't know what to call them then. I stood frozen, watching them. My flashlight flickered and died, and my hands started shaking. The temperature dropped so fast I could see my breath in the air. That's when I noticed something even stranger. The trees they touched seemed to come alive. The branches would twist and bend, like they were becoming arms and fingers. I tried to take a picture with my phone, but it was dead again. Every piece of equipment I had just stopped working. The only thing that kept working was my old silver cross necklace from my priest days, which started feeling warm against my chest. Then I heard it, children's laughter, but it sounded wrong, like it was coming from underwater or very far away. It was coming from deeper in the woods, where the mist was thickest. I knew I should call for backup, but something told me these kids didn't have time to wait. I took out my cross, gripped it tight, and started walking toward the sound. The hollow men seemed to notice me then. They turned their empty faces toward me, and I felt a fear like I'd never known before. But I kept walking. Those kids needed help, and I was the only one who could see what we were really dealing with. What I didn't know then was that I was walking straight into their trap, and the real horror was just beginning. I followed the children's laughter deeper into the woods. The mist was so thick now that I could barely see 10 feet ahead of me. My cross was getting warmer and warmer in my hand, almost like it was trying to warn me about something. That's when I found the first real clue about where the kids might be. There was a small red sneaker on the ground. I recognized it as Tommy Wilson's. Next to it was one of those creepy stick figures, but this one was different. It seemed to be pointing to a part of the forest I'd never explored before. As I walked further, the trees started getting closer together, their branches making weird shapes above me. The air felt heavy, like right before a big storm. But the scariest part was the silence. No birds, no insects, not even the sound of leaves rustling. It was like the whole forest was holding its breath. Then I saw them again, the hollow men. This time, there were 5 of them, standing in a circle around what looked like a door made of pure shadow. It was just floating there between 2 ancient oak trees, like a tear in the world. Through it, I could hear the children crying. The hollow men turned to look at me all at once. Their bodies seemed to grow taller, and the mist swirled around them like a tornado. One of them spoke, but not with a voice. It was more like words appearing directly in my mind. Priest turned ranger, it said. You don't belong here. I held up my cross, and they actually moved back a little. That's when I noticed something important. They were afraid of it. Not much, but enough to give me hope. Where are the children? I demanded, trying to sound braver than I felt. They are ours now, another one said. As per the ancient pact. What pact? I asked, taking a step closer to the shadow door. Every 100 years we feed. It is our right. It has always been this way. I could see shapes moving behind the shadow door now, small shapes. The missing children were in there, and I knew I had to get them out, no matter what it cost me. But the hollow men weren't going to make it easy. They started moving toward me, their smoky bodies blocking my path to the door. I needed a plan, and I needed it fast. I remembered something from my days as a priest. Ancient evil always has rules it has to follow. So I gripped my cross tighter and stood my ground. "You mentioned a pact," I said, my voice shaking a bit. "That means there must be terms, rules." The tallest hollow man drifted closer. The air got so cold my teeth started chattering. "One life for many," it whispered in my head. "That is the rule. That has always been the rule." I understood then what I had to do. Looking past them, through the shadow door, I could see 6 children huddled together, including Tommy Wilson. They looked scared but alive. I took a deep breath and made my choice. "Take me instead," I said. "Let the children go, and you can have me." The hollow men seemed to discuss this among themselves, their shadowy forms swirling together like smoke. Finally, they agreed. "Your life has more weight," they said. "You have seen more, felt more, feared more. It will sustain us longer." I started reciting the prayers I remembered from my priest days, holding my cross out in front of me. The shadow door opened wider, and I told the children to run. They scrambled past me, all 6 of them, looking like they'd been sleeping for a very long time. But I had one more trick up my sleeve. As the hollow men moved to take me, I pulled out something I'd brought just in case, holy water. I'd blessed it myself that morning, remembering the old ways. I threw it at the shadow door while still reciting the prayers. The door started to crack like glass. The hollow men screamed, not in my head this time, but a real scream that shook the trees. They tried to grab me, and I felt years of my life being pulled away. My hair turned gray, my skin wrinkled, and my bones ached. But I kept praying and splashing the holy water until the shadow door shattered completely. The hollow men were sucked back into their dimension, but they took something from me first. When it was all over, I looked like I'd aged 40 years in just a few minutes. But the children were safe, and that's what mattered. That was 30 years ago, but the effects of that night never really went away. The 6 children we saved, they were different after that. They never talked about what happened to them on the other side of that shadow door, but their parents said they wouldn't sleep without lights on anymore. Some of them would wake up screaming about the dark people. Tommy Wilson never went near the woods again. The 4 kids we couldn't save, well, their families eventually moved away from the town. "Too many memories," they said. I understand why. As for me, I had to retire early from being a ranger. Hard to explain to people why a 35-year-old man suddenly looked 75. My hair stayed completely white, and my face kept those wrinkles I got that night. Doctors couldn't explain it, of course. They just called it rapid aging syndrome or something like that. The forest changed too. That part where it all happened, it's always darker there now, even on the brightest summer day. The trees don't grow right anymore, and no birds nest there. The locals avoid it completely. They say it feels wrong, and they're right. Sometimes when it's really quiet at night, I think I can still hear them, the hollow men. They're still there, behind whatever thin wall separates our world from theirs. Waiting, the stick figures show up in the trees every now and then, but they never stay long. I keep my cross with me all the time now, and I've got holy water in every room of my house. Call me paranoid, but when you've seen what I've seen, you take precautions. Because the worst part is knowing that in another 100 years, they'll try again. Different town maybe, different children, but they'll be back. But at least now someone knows about them. Someone knows what to look for. The stick figures, the strange mist, the shadows that move wrong. And maybe, just maybe, that knowledge will help save more children next time. I still dream about that night sometimes. In my dreams, I am always walking toward that shadow door, knowing what's on the other side. Only in my dreams. I am not fast enough, not brave enough, and the hollow men win. Then I wake up, touch my cross, and remind myself that sometimes, just sometimes, the good guys do win, even if they have to pay a heavy price for it. Last week, I got a letter from Tommy Wilson. He's a grown man now, with kids of his own. He wrote to tell me that his daughter had started talking about seeing tall shadow people near their home in Colorado. She's the same age he was when it all happened. I packed my bags that same day. My body might be old now, but I still remember everything about fighting them. I've spent the last 30 years studying, preparing, just in case this day came. My bag is full of crosses, holy water, and other things I've learned might help. I am writing this down now, sitting in a motel just outside of Denver. Tomorrow I'll meet Tommy and his family. I know the Hollow Men are breaking their own rules by coming back early. It hasn't been 100 years yet. Maybe they're angry about what I did last time. Maybe they want revenge. But I am ready for them. This time, I know what I am dealing with. This time, I have a plan. And this time, I won't let them take any children at all. If you are reading this and you start seeing stick figures in the trees, or if you notice mist moving the wrong way, or if your electronics start failing for no reason, don't wait. Don't try to explain it away. Get help. Remember my story. Because the Hollow Men are real, and they're still hungry. But now, you know about them too. And knowledge, as I learned in that dark forest 30 years ago, is sometimes the best weapon we have. I have to go now. Tommy's daughter said the shadows are getting closer to their house, and I can feel in my old bones that we don't have much time left. Wish me luck. I might need it more than ever this time. Michael O'Brien, the 15th of October, 2021. The end. My name is Thomas Blackwood, and what I am about to tell you happened to me in the summer of 1995. I was 50 years old then, working as a park ranger at Yellowstone National Park. You know, the place with all those fancy geysers and hot springs. I'd been there for almost 20 years, and I thought I'd seen everything there was to see in those woods. Boy, was I wrong. I come from Native American heritage. My grandmother used to tell me stories about ancient spirits and creatures when I was young. I never really believed those tales, just thought they were meant to scare kids into behaving. But after what happened that summer, I wish I'd paid more attention to her warnings. It all started with small things at first. Tourists would come to my station saying they'd seen someone who looked exactly like their friend or family member walking in a different part of the park. But when they'd check, that person had been somewhere else entirely. I brushed it off as confusion. Yellowstone is a big place after all, and people get lost easily. Then the animals started acting weird. I am talking really weird. The elk, usually calm and used to people, began avoiding certain areas like their lives depended on it. Bears abandoned their usual feeding grounds. Even the small critters, like squirrels and rabbits, seemed to disappear from some parts of the park completely. But what really got my attention was when I started noticing changes in the landscape. Places I'd walked past 1,000 times suddenly looked different. A rock formation that had been there for decades would somehow be in a slightly different spot the next day. At first, I thought I was losing my mind. Maybe the job was finally getting to me. Then one evening, as I was doing my final rounds, I saw something that made my blood run cold. There was this tourist, a young woman, taking photos near Old Faithful. Nothing unusual about that except I saw her in 2 places at once. And I don't mean like a quick glance. I stood there watching for a good minute as both figures moved differently, but had the same face, same clothes, same everything. That's when I remembered my grandmother's stories about the skinwalker, an ancient creature that could take any form it wanted. And suddenly, all those weird things happening in the park started making a terrifying kind of sense. I didn't know it then, but that was just the beginning of what would become the most horrifying summer of my life, a summer that would change everything I thought I knew about the world and about myself. The next few weeks were like a nightmare that just kept getting worse. People started disappearing, not just getting lost, but really vanishing. First, it was a hiker who went off trail near the hot springs. His friends said they saw him walking towards them, but when they called out, he didn't respond. When they caught up to where he should have been, there was nobody there. Then came the Morgan family incident. I'll never forget little Tommy Morgan, just 8 years old, tugging at my sleeve with tears in his eyes. "Ranger Tom," he said, "I saw my mom walking into the woods, but my mom's right here with me." When I looked where he was pointing, I saw a figure that looked exactly like Mrs. Morgan disappearing between the trees. The real Mrs. Morgan was standing right next to me, white as a sheet. The animals were getting more scared too. One morning, I found a whole herd of elk running through the visitors' parking lot, something I'd never seen in my 20 years at the park. They were running from something, but what? The wolves weren't hunting, they were hiding too. I started keeping a journal of everything strange I saw. Some days, I'd spot the same person in 3 different places. Other times, I'd find weird footprints that started human but changed into animal tracks halfway through. The worst was when I'd hear people calling for help. But when I'd get there, there'd be no one around. My old radio started picking up weird sounds at night, like whispers in a language I didn't understand, but somehow reminded me of my grandmother's ancient prayers. Sometimes, the whispers would say my name. I started carrying my grandmother's medicine pouch with me everywhere I went. One evening, while I was checking the trails near the geysers, I saw myself. Not in a reflection, I saw another me, standing about 50 feet away, staring right at me. It smiled, but not like how a person smiles. Its mouth opened too wide, showing too many teeth. When I blinked, it was gone, but I found strange burn marks on the ground where it had been standing. I knew then that this wasn't just some wild animal or a bunch of coincidences. This was the skinwalker my grandmother had warned me about, and it was getting stronger. People weren't just seeing things anymore, they were disappearing, and I was the only one who knew what we were really dealing with. The park officials weren't any help. How could I tell them that an ancient shape-shifting creature was hunting in Yellowstone? They'd think I was crazy, but I knew I had to do something. 9 people were already missing, and whatever this thing was, it was starting to focus on me. Little did I know, that was exactly what the skinwalker wanted, to draw me out. And it was working perfectly. Things got really intense after that. I started learning what this creature could do, and each discovery was scarier than the last. It wasn't just about copying people's looks anymore. This thing had powers I'd only heard about in my grandmother's scariest stories. One afternoon, I was tracking what I thought was a lost hiker. Instead, I found the skinwalker practicing its abilities. It stood in a clearing, and I watched from behind a tree as it changed from a deer to a bear to a tourist, smooth as water. My hands were shaking so bad I could barely hold my binoculars. But that wasn't even the worst part. A few days later, I saw it touch a tree, and the whole thing just died, turned black and crumbled like it was hundreds of years old. Its poison touch was real, just like the story said. I started wearing thick gloves all the time after that, just in case. The creature could trick your mind too. One time, I thought I was walking towards the ranger station, but after an hour of walking, I realized I'd been going in circles. The skinwalker had made me see things that weren't there, like a movie playing in my head. The animals in the park became like its puppets. I'd see birds flying in unnatural patterns, spelling out words in the sky. Deer would stand perfectly still, watching me with empty eyes, then all turn their heads at exactly the same time. Once, a whole pack of wolves surrounded my cabin at night, but their howls sounded like human laughter. What really got to me was how it could heal itself. I managed to shoot it once when it came too close to the visitor center. The bullet hit it right in the chest, but the wound closed up like magic. It just looked at me, smiled that horrible too-wide smile, and walked away into the woods. I tried everything I could think of to stop it. Salt lines around buildings, protective charms, even modern security cameras. Nothing worked. The cameras would go fuzzy whenever the creature was near, and it walked through salt lines like they were nothing. Then it started leaving me messages. I'd find strange symbols carved into trees, or my own handwriting in my journal on pages I never wrote. The messages were always the same. "Come find me, Thomas. Let's end this." I knew it was trying to lure me into a trap. But as more people went missing, and the park became more dangerous, I realized I didn't have a choice. I had to face this thing. But first, I needed to learn how to fight it. That's when I remembered my grandmother's old trunk in my attic, filled with papers about our tribe's history and ancient rituals. Maybe, just maybe, there was something in there that could help me defeat this monster. Little did I know, reading those papers would lead me to the most terrifying night of my life. I spent 3 days reading my grandmother's old papers. My hands were shaking when I finally found what I was looking for, a ritual to trap a skinwalker. But what I read made my stomach turn. The ritual needed blood, my blood, and it had to be done at a place where the Earth's power was strongest. In Yellowstone, that meant only one place, the geyser basin. The papers warned that the skinwalker would know what I was planning. These creatures can sense when someone's trying to stop them. I didn't have much time to prepare, but I knew what I needed. My grandmother's medicine bag, a special knife made of bone, and enough courage to face this thing alone. That night I could barely sleep. The wolves were howling again, but this time they seemed to be singing my name. The radio in my cabin kept turning on by itself, playing static and whispers. Even my own shadow on the wall didn't look quite right. It moved when I was standing still. At dawn, I packed my backpack and left a note for the other rangers, just in case things went wrong. If I don't come back, close the park. I knew they'd probably think I was crazy, but I had to try something. The walk to the geyser basin was the longest of my life. The morning fog was thick, making everything look ghostly. Usually you can hear birds and small animals in the park, but that morning was dead silent. Even the geysers seemed quieter, like they were holding their breath. I kept seeing things from the corner of my eye, shapes moving in the mist, faces in the trees. Sometimes they looked like the missing tourists, sometimes like animals, and sometimes like things I can't even describe. The skinwalker was playing with me, trying to scare me before I even got there. About halfway there, I found fresh tracks in the mud. They started as bear prints, changed to human footprints, then to something with too many toes. They were heading the same way I was to the geyser basin. The creature knew I was coming, and it was waiting for me. When I finally reached the basin, steam was rising from the hot springs, making everything look hazy. The ground felt alive under my feet, rumbling with the power of the geysers. I clutched my grandmother's medicine bag tight and took out the bone knife. That's when I saw it, standing on the other side of the largest hot spring. It looked like me at first, then it started to change. I finally got to see its true form, and I'll never forget what happened next. The skinwalker's true form was nothing like I'd imagined. It was like looking at a person made of shifting shadows, with eyes that glowed like hot coals. Its body kept changing, one moment tall, the next short, sometimes human, sometimes animal, never staying the same for more than a few seconds. Thomas Blackwood, it spoke, its voice sounding like many voices talking at once. You brought your grandmother's little toys to fight me? It laughed, and the sound made the steam around us turn black. I gripped the bone knife tighter and started the ritual my grandmother's papers had described. I began speaking the ancient words she'd taught me when I was young, words I never thought I'd need to use. As I spoke, I cut my palm with the knife, letting my blood drip onto the ground. The creature didn't like that. It screamed, a sound like a mountain lion mixed with a human cry, and the ground started shaking. The nearest geyser erupted, shooting boiling water into the air. But I kept speaking the words, my voice getting stronger. That's when things got really scary. The skinwalker started showing me visions. I saw the missing tourists crying for help. I saw my grandmother telling me to stop. I even saw myself as a child, running away in fear. But I remembered the paper's warning. Everything it shows you is a lie. I kept going, even when the creature rushed at me. It moved like lightning, its claws barely missing my face. The steam was so thick now I could hardly see, but I could feel it circling me. My blood was making the ground glow slightly where it had fallen. Suddenly, the largest geyser, Old Faithful itself, started rumbling. The skinwalker had backed me up against it. I could feel the heat building under my feet, knowing the geyser was about to blow. The creature smiled that terrible smile again, thinking it had me trapped. But that's exactly what I needed. Just as Old Faithful erupted, I finished the ritual words and jumped aside. the skinwalker wasn't quick enough. The geyser's water, mixed with my blood on the ground, shot straight through it. Its screech was so loud I had to cover my ears. What happened next changed everything. For the park, for the creature, and for me. When the steam finally cleared, I thought it was over. The skinwalker was gone, and for a moment, everything was quiet. But then I felt it, a strange burning sensation spreading through my body, starting from where I'd cut my hand. You see, I'd defeated the skinwalker, but there was something my grandmother's papers hadn't mentioned. When you destroy a creature like that, its spirit needs somewhere to go. And because of the ritual and my blood, it chose me. I felt it enter my body like ice-cold water flowing through my veins. I wasn't just Thomas Blackwood anymore, I had become something else. Not fully a skinwalker, but not fully human either. A guardian, forced to protect the park from other dark things that might try to enter. The missing people, we found most of them wandering in the woods over the next few days. They were confused, couldn't remember what had happened to them. Out of the 12 people who went missing, we managed to save 9. The other 3, well, their families are still waiting for answers. That was 30 years ago. I am still here in Yellowstone, still working as a ranger. Most people just see an old Native American man doing his job, but I am much more than that now. Sometimes, late at night, I can feel the skinwalker's power inside me, trying to get out. I fight it every day. The park has changed too. The animals know what I am now. They don't run from me, but they don't come too close either. The geysers seem to erupt differently when I am near, like they remember that final battle. And sometimes, on quiet nights, I can hear whispers in the steam, reminding me of what I've become. I still carry my grandmother's medicine bag, but now it's to protect others from me, not the other way around. Every full moon, I have to perform a small ritual to keep the skinwalker's spirit in check. It's my burden to bear, my price for saving the park. If you ever visit Yellowstone and see an old ranger named Thomas, just remember, some stories about this place are more than just stories. And some guardians are protecting you from things you'd rather not know about. That's my story. Not many people would believe it, but every word is true. I just hope that by sharing it, I am doing what my grandmother would have wanted, keeping the old knowledge alive, and warning others that not all legends are just make-believe.